Panic sets in. Canada overwhelmed. Carney leaves borders wide open. CBC defends. Canada faces profound uncertainty, and citizens increasingly panic about the nation's path. Once celebrated for measured immigration and openness, the country now struggles with pressures it cannot contain. Prime Minister Mark Carney promised to balance growth with compassion, but reality shows otherwise. Housing is scarce, healthcare is strained, and communities buckle under rapid demographic change. The sense of reassurance is fading, replaced by growing anxiety and anger. The panic is most visible in major cities like Toronto, Vancouver, and Montreal, where populations are soaring beyond local capacity. Rents have hit historic highs, pushing families into unaffordable, overcrowded housing, while shelters and tent encampments grow. Infrastructure cannot keep up, and essential services such as healthcare and transit face crushing demand. Despite official claims that immigration fills labor gaps and fuels innovation, many Canadians experience the opposite: rising costs, longer wait times, and shrinking access to basics. Overwhelm is no longer theoretical, but a daily reality. The accusation that Carney has left Canada's borders wide open stems from his government's decision to continue admitting high numbers of permanent residents, refugees, and international students, even as local systems strain under the pressure. Although the Strong Borders Act was unveiled earlier this year to project strength on security, critics argue that it is more optics than substance. Border enforcement has tightened against criminal networks, yet the overall numbers of arrivals have not slowed. To many Canadians, this translates into a government more focused on signaling toughness than solving the root causes of the crisis. Carney defends the policy as necessary for long-term prosperity, but opponents call it reckless and disconnected from reality. Carney's critics point to a mismatch between policy and capacity. On paper, immigration drives GDP and offsets Canada's aging workforce. In practice, however, the speed of population growth far outpaces the construction of homes, the expansion of hospitals, or the training of teachers. A middle path might have been possible, but the scale of the government's ambition has left little room for gradual adjustment. Even supporters of immigration find themselves unsettled by the sheer pace of change. The phrase "wide open borders" has become shorthand for a government that seems unwilling or unable to align its lofty goals with the daily struggles of its people. The CBC's role has become central, as the broadcaster consistently defends government policies by highlighting immigration's cultural and economic benefits. Its coverage showcases newcomers filling jobs, starting businesses, and enriching society. Yet many feel their struggles. Overcrowded hospitals, unaffordable housing, and rising costs are ignored. To them, CBC reinforces the government's narrative, deepening perceptions that media and political elites are disconnected from ordinary Canadians. The defense mounted by CBC has also sparked debates about trust in institutions. Critics accuse the broadcaster of losing its independence, serving as a megaphone for government talking points rather than a critical watchdog. Defenders argue that CBC has a responsibility to highlight positive stories in order to prevent division and fear. Yet the deeper problem is not about individual stories, but about credibility. When coverage feels one-sided, trust erodes, and once trust is lost, citizens become more vulnerable to polarization and suspicion. The emotional gap between government messaging and lived reality grows larger by the day. The consequences of these choices are now undeniable. Healthcare systems, already stretched thin by the pandemic and years of underfunding, face record wait times. Schools in urban districts scramble to accommodate thousands of new students, while teachers report burnout and declining classroom quality. Social services, from housing supports to language training, operate at the breaking point. These systemic strains amplify resentment, particularly in working-class communities that experience the competition for limited resources most acutely. Immigration, once broadly embraced as a national strength, now risks becoming a fault line in Canadian politics. Economically, the story is equally complex. On one hand, immigration has helped drive GDP growth and kept industries afloat. Employers in construction, agriculture, and healthcare praise the influx of workers. On the other hand, ordinary Canadians feel that the benefits are not reaching them. Wage growth has stagnated, housing has become unattainable, and inflation continues to squeeze families. The promise of shared prosperity feels distant, replaced instead by the perception that newcomers and elites gain while citizens shoulder the costs. Carney's insistence on long-term economic vision clashes with a public demanding immediate relief. The United States under President Donald Trump adds another dimension. With Trump calling for stricter border enforcement and reduced asylum claims, Canada has seen an uptick in irregular crossings as migrants seek alternatives. This adds further stress to border towns and provinces unprepared for the influx. Carney's strategy of cooperating with Washington on security while maintaining high admissions at home has drawn both praise and condemnation. Some see it as balancing compassion with international obligations, while others see it as Canada bearing the brunt of pressures that the U.S. refuses to absorb. In political terms, this debate reshapes the national landscape. Carney frames his policies as a moral and economic necessity, while the opposition accuses him of failing to protect citizens' livelihoods. The CBC's consistent defense of government actions deepens this divide, creating a sense that institutions no longer reflect the anxieties of ordinary Canadians. The result is a growing sense of alienation, where people feel their voices do not matter in decisions that reshape their communities. Panic is not just about numbers. It is about the erosion of trust in leaders and institutions meant to serve the public. For many Canadians, this moment feels like a breaking point. Anxiety about the future is compounded by the sense that problems are spiraling faster than solutions can be found. Carney's promise of order through reform has not materialized in ways people can see or feel. Instead, the perception of wide-open borders dominates public discourse, and the CBC's defense of these policies feels like denial of lived reality. Whether or not Canada is objectively overwhelmed, the feeling of being overwhelmed has become the prevailing truth in households across the nation. The future depends on whether Canada can regain balance. That means slowing down the pace of change so communities can adapt, rebuilding trust in media and political institutions, and addressing the concrete struggles, housing, healthcare, jobs, that define daily life. Panic does not have to define the nation's future, but without meaningful adjustments, the fear that Canada is overwhelmed will harden into lasting division. Carney's legacy and Canada's path forward will depend on whether he acknowledges the gap between lofty ideals and human reality.